Yes, thank you very much for the introduction and for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here and to tell something about European Baltic Sea tendencies and of course global tendencies in innovation and economic development, to less extent in economic development. We'll see. So. The motivation is relatively simply. There is an European strategy, the 2020 strategy, and there is one statement. It says that there's a vision for the EU to become one of the smartest and most competitive regions in the world. So, I mean, this is quite impressive. And quite impressive vision. And 2020 is already next year. So far, I think this is also an optimistic vision, if you like. So today, of course, if you look into the Baltic Sea region, there are already many actors which are relevant for the world market. They're mostly coming from the Nordic countries, and also you have also leading inventors, of course, coming from Germany. It depends also possibly of the point of view. The question is then, what does the future of the innovation areas look like? And you give me already the outline for the 2 days presentation. I will you firstly show some statistics. Of course, I hope I will not bore you with this. And then I will come then later then to some trends and also then to policy conclusions, if you like. So, the European perspective. So, these are some statistics. I think I have here a pointer, right? So, it is relatively easy. So, we have here some leading countries like Sweden. They have huge research and development intensities. You can compare it easily with countries like Portugal, Poland, but also Latvia. So that's unfortunately on the below scale of this comparison, if you like. So these are just only some figures at first, okay? So then, of course, there are some other, let's say, typical innovation or invention. Let's say it's more an invention actually factor. The patent applications to the European Patent Office. And there you have more or less a similar picture. You have the leading countries. They are also coming from the Nordic countries, if you like. And then you see also behind me the average for EU28, for instance. So, and then, there's also a surprise. You see then also in this statistics some figures for Japan or the United States, but these are the patent applications then to the European Patent Office. So this is not in general, not the American Patent Office from the United States, just only from the European Patent Office. So that you have to take in mind. So there are also other statistics about trademarks. I don't know if you are familiar with this statistics about trademarks. This is more about the branding of a company, of the name of company. So this is then more, if you like, the real innovation factor of an already existing product process, or also of an existing company, if you see. There's a huge increase in the last years, and so far there's also a huge request then for innovation and innovation branding, if you like. So this are again some statistics from in comparison between some different countries, from Germany, for instance, also from the Nordic countries like Denmark and others. But we see also, this is quite interesting actually, that the United States have also a huge impact for the application of trademarks to the European Union. So that's actually one of the big actors. And so far, there are also big brands like big companies like Coca-Cola and so on, which have a huge interest for saving their property rights actually. And so far, But if we compare this then, this is the last slide of some European statistics, and I will go to the region actually. If you compare it then with top regions, that's very typical. There are just a few leading regions. They're mostly concentrated here in the example in Milano, in Milan, for instance, and Paris, and other regions like Berlin, Stockholm, and then, of course, Munich. So let's say some typical leading regions. If we look then at the same statistics for patent applications, design, corporate design. If we look then on R&D intensity, if we compare then all those, let's say, top regions or less top regions, we would have then the same picture, and there's actually not such a big difference actually. So, however, now I would like to come to the perspective of the Baltic Sea region and to show there some special, let's say, interest, of course, as well. So this is, again, the gross domestic expenditures of the Baltic Sea region. But you see also behind me in the slides the target of the European 2020 goal. So you see, for instance, here Denmark, they had in 2004 a relatively high share of expenditures in research and development. And there was also an increase in the last years. And the goal of Denmark was to target until 2020, so next year, to have then around 3% of its GDP invested then in research and development activities. So just wanted to give you a picture. And then, of course, you see the same here for the statistics for Latvia, for instance, and there is, of course, an increase here from 2004 to 2014, and I'm pretty sure also that there is an increase then in the last years. But the target for 2020, for the vision of 2020, is relatively high, and I'm relatively sure that Latvia will not hit the target of the 2020 goal. So, but also many other countries like Sweden, for instance, and the EU28 in average, of course. So this is just only one impression, actually. So, to give you an idea about the relevance of innovation development, of course, there are relatively high, let's say, investments in more the economically advanced countries with high incomes, with a high GDP. For instance, here for Sweden and Finland and so on. And they have huge investments in innovation, actually, to develop then new economic products. And you see also that there is a gap then between the development and also in the real GDP growth. So there's an, if you like, a catching up process from countries like Estonia, Latvia and so on, which are catching up in GDP per capita to the Western European member states of the Baltic Sea region. And but you see also that there's a need then for the investment and innovations to proceed and to rise in the effectiveness to catch up then to the other countries. This is a typical picture. So, and now I show you some, let's say, pictures about the regional distribution, if you like. So these are some older pictures, but still the relevance is still given, if you like. So there is a typical concentration in the Nordic countries, as I said before, but you will find them as well more in the, let's say, capital regions, if you like. So this is another slide. It shows the Regional Innovation Scoreboard, which is performed for around more than 200 regions, NUTS2 regions in Europe. And you see if the color of the NUTS2 region is green, so green or blue, green, whatever. So better is the performance actually from the regional innovation scoreboard perspective, and so the color is more yellow or red, so less actually good as a performance than in this regional innovation scoreboard. So, and you see this is a typical picture. You have then the random, the south of Europe, but also in your region, the Baltic Sea area, so in of the Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuanian region, for instance. And then there are huge disparities also within countries, if you compare it then with France, for instance, Germany, but also with Poland, for example. So then I would like to raise another issue. I know the time is running. So of course, there are, let's say, specific fields of innovation. One idea is to rise the high, or to give a highlight then to the creative economy actually. There's a specific idea behind it. So it seems to be, that's one of the statements here, that the most successful places are those places which are particularly concentrated in idea producing ideas or industries. So, and so far, it is not the manufacturing then of cars which is relevant. I mean, it's relevant, of course, for producing GDP, but it is also the designing then of cars, of course. The designing, the color of cars is also to have the co-invention aspect then of a specific, if you like, product for manufacturing products, for instance. So far, there's an impact of an cross-cluster, if you like, aspect of creative industries to other industries actually. And so far this has a huge relevance, and you will see then on the next slide that also the relevance for especially Poland, but also the 3 Baltic states is much more, let's say, positive, and also much more, let's say, also becoming relevance to the European market. So I will you show this picture. So at the left-hand side, you see the total employment, and you see already relatively huge concentration, especially in Poland. This is really surprising in this comparison. Yeah, and just only this comparison. In some regions, it's also really wondering about it, but. If you would compare it with South Germany, for instance, but also with parts of Italy and also Netherlands and so on, you will find there are also huge concentrations, of course. So I just skipped it out here. So, and then you will see also there a relatively high growth rate of creative industry employment, then especially in regions like Lithuania, but also to some extent in some regions in Poland, for instance. And this is quite interesting. And so far, there is an aspect of the creative industry with the relevance then to the Baltic Sea region. And this is relatively interesting. So now I want to come to some trends, if you like, just only to show some trends. Of course, there are many trends. And I try to give you some ideas about it. So there's one idea from the European Commission. It's called the European Strategy of Policy Analysis System. And the main idea behind it is that we have an increasing complexity through different trends and let's say visions, if you like. So, sorry. So the first, just only to give you an example, there are social inequalities, and those social inequalities, they are globally increasing partly, and this has a relevance, of course, to many, many countries, and this will also then rise or increase the effect of complexity. Then we have, for instance, the climate change. The climate change is also an independently system with the governance, for instance, also with it will increase the inequalities. So far, there are many, many factors which rise the complexity of the systems and also of the social and economic, let's say, systems. So this is just only one picture, and to give you an idea about future trends and future development. So, if we show a little bit more systematically, then the global trends. We have the typical trends like the climate change, I already mentioned it, but also some others like the global political transition, globalization factors. So this has then, or this relates then to specific problems and challenges. We want to pick up one example. The climate change has then an effect on, or will challenge then to the global warming, and also this has then effects on the transportation demand, of course, and the energy use. And so far, there's a need then to address these specific challenges through specific, if you like, interest and also specific domains of interest. There's a need for looking at energy, on the energy system, but it has also an impact on food, for instance, the food production or health production and so on. So these are just only examples of possibly trends and also realistic trends, which will come not only to somewhere else in South America. These are realistic, let's say, trends which will also hit Europe and the countries of Europe, of course. So, and this is also an increasing trend, actually. There's an increasing urbanization. So this is a relatively old picture, but it still has some relevance. It's actually an output of a study from a colleague and mine, which we did a couple of years ago. And there's an increasing, let's say, population tending to concentrate in just only single cities. And you can observe it in your countries, or many, many countries actually. And this has an effect, of course, of how to organize a production, how to organize services for the population, if you like. So if we take here then an example here, for Riga, for instance, Riga is concentrating or concentrates more than 50%. I think if we would update this data, then possibly more than 60% of its GDP production and relevance to the country. So far, more or less every production is then linked just only to one capital and you're actually in your state. And that's quite interesting. You can find also those figures then for Estonia, for instance, but also for Lithuania, but also partly, if you look on cases like the Nordic country, like Stockholm, so in summary, the most concentration of economic activity will take in just a few cities and places. And this is a global trend, actually. So you have also huge trends of urbanization in many, let's say, Asian countries, African countries, and so on. So to sum up and to give you some ideas about policy, and I have to be fast, I think, in this section. There's a concept called smart specialization strategy, and I'm relatively sure about it that you have heard about it. And also Vyacheslav Orban, a colleague of mine, he will tell a little bit more later about it, but especially about the project. And the idea is that it is necessary to have a strategy. I mean, there are existing strategies also for the Vidzeme planning region, for instance, that is necessary to identify specific fields of domains, which I mentioned before, to meet specific global trends then, and to develop then industries which are demanding then these domains and which are able to develop or to implement then such domains. So it's a kind of process, of course, a so-called entrepreneurial discovery process, where relevant stakeholders from the region are involved to development this strategy to rise in the innovation, let's say, innovation-related growth at your place. So stakeholders, typical stakeholders are then, I don't know, universities, non-governmental institutions, the typical triple helix approach, which is already mentioned by the colleague from the Netherlands yesterday, as I understood. Um, so I will skip this. Possibly we have later time to discuss it, I don't know. Sorry. So, what is in the lesson of the smart specialization strategy, if you like? There are specific aspects of it. Of course, there are, as I mentioned, there are leading regions which are able to develop also general purpose technologies, so very basic and radical innovations, if you like. And of course, for this, you need a lot of research capacities and knowledge capacities and so on. So it's not very realistic to be in business of developing general purpose technology for regions which are lagging behind, if you like. So, and so far, this strategy gives an advice for to be a kind of secondary region or a kind of follower. Not in the development, as I mentioned already, the innovation, but to use the co-invention aspect of a specific innovation. So that's the idea, actually. So it's not realistic that you develop a virtual reality product in this region, possibly, I don't know, possibly you have the capacities, but it's very realistic also to implement it and to use it, and then to be let's say, to be a leader then in the implementation. This is then already a success. And this is also something which you can relate then to different industries. You can use it, for instance, in the touristic industry, but you can use it also to some extent in some creative and cultural industries, for instance, but also to very primary industry sectors, if you like. So this is relatively interesting, and I think this is also what many regions could focus on and where they have to focus on, actually. So, of course, there are different aspects of the smart specialization strategy. It makes sense, of course, to internationalize then different, let's say, aspects of this strategy. And one of the, let's say, projects which are promoting it is this Go Smart project, where Václav Orban will tell a bit more about it. But the main idea is to support then small and medium-sized enterprises to be internationalized then and to, let's say, to develop and to use the instruments of the smart specialization strategies of your specific region, but then in an international aspect. So this is relatively smart, if you like, and has a huge relevance, of course. So the conclusion is, of course, there's an innovation capability in the European Union, so I started with this. And it has, of course, a huge impact for income and wealth. And so far, also this Innovation Week has a huge relevance to, of course, for the region, but also for this aspect of income growth, if you like. So, frankly, I don't think that the European 2020 targets of the innovation will meet. So I think they fail like the Lisbon strategy 2010, I think. So it's actually my opinion, so it's not realistic to achieve these goals until next year, to be realistic. So, but there are also, if you look on different studies, the European Union in total is far off being completely outperformed by the United States, for instance. Of course, there are specific fields where the United States, but also China, for instance, are much more relevant, much more innovative, but there are, of course, still many fields of industries which are very relevant for the world market. So, but of course, so if you look then in the Baltic Sea region, it's a very heterogeneous region, of course. If you compare the Nordic countries with parts of Germany, for instance, are already very heterogeneous. But if you then look then on the case of Poland, for instance, but also Lithuania and so on, they're really different in the development. So, and this is, I think, one of the biggest challenge possibly also regarding the inclusion. So, and then, of course, it's also critical. There is a tendency for concentrating income, money, businesses, and so on, just only in a few capital cities. So, and this is a really dramatic challenge, which you can observe in all, more or less all, let's say, countries in Europe, but also in many other countries in the world. It's not just only a phenomenon of the 3 Baltic states, for instance. It's a phenomenon which we can observe in more or less every country. So one, I think, further conclusion could be then to focus then on the key concept of the S3, to have a relevant strategic instrument to develop and to challenge then the global trends, I think. And it is also relevant not to think only to be the best innovator. It is also, I think, a relevant strategy to implement already an innovation and to use the innovation. And I think this is a correct, or I think also a good strategy. So this is my sign. So, and I think I can skip the last slide. I have already said enough about the disparities, and I would like to thank you for your audience. Thank you very much.